June 18th, 1944, 20:15 hours, Camp Swift, Texas. The first thing they notice is the heat. Not the daytime furnace of the Texas sun, but the trapped, sour heat of 200 men crammed into a wooden recreation hall, sweat and dust and wet wool uniforms hanging in the air. The windows are blacked out with planks. Mosquitoes whine somewhere in the dark. Then the sound starts. A clacking, mechanical rhythm from the back of the room, the American projector coughing to life. A cone of shaky white light cuts through the cigarette smoke, dust motes drifting like snow in a beam that ends on a makeshift bedsheet screen nailed to the far wall. You can almost hear the silence swallowing the room. Obergefreiter Karl Mueller sits 3 rows from the back, shoulders touching, knees jammed against the bench in front. He can smell the man next to him, stale sweat, tobacco, faint machine oil that never seems to wash out of mechanics' hands. On his left, Feldwebel Ernst Webern leans forward, elbows on his thighs, jaw set like he's about to go into action instead of watching an American Kinoabend. At the end of the row, a U.S. military police sergeant, chevron and rocker on his sleeve, pistol on his hip, stands with his back to the wall. The white letters MP on his helmet band catch the projector light every few seconds, flashing like a metronome. The Americans had announced it at roll call. Movie tonight, 8 o'clock, voluntary. Voluntary. In a camp ringed with barbed wire, watchtowers, and Browning machine guns. The word had drawn a few bitter laughs from the older NCOs, but they had all come, some out of boredom, some out of hunger for anything that broke the monotony of counting days and cigarettes, some, though no one would admit it, out of curiosity. A voice barks in English from near the projector, sharp and practiced. "All right, settle down in front, no talking during the show. You fellas are guests, act like it." The word guests floats above their heads, absurd and irritating. Mueller catches enough English now to understand it. He feels a flicker of something he hasn't felt in weeks. Not hope, not exactly, something else. Rebellion? The film jumps, the beam stutters, and suddenly the white bedsheet blooms into moving shadows. At first, chaos. A swirling logo, big letters, music that sounds like trumpets with too much sugar. Some of the prisoners snort. One mutters, "Typisch amerikanisch," under his breath. A few laugh when the sound and the picture are out of sync for a moment. Then the first real image holds. A street. Bright, wide, clean. Cars, big round-nosed American cars, glide down a sunlit boulevard lined with trees and shops. Neon signs flash. People walk in summer clothes, men in short sleeves, hats tipped back, women in light dresses, bare arms, hair soft and curled. No rubble, no craters, no air raid sirens. Mueller blinks. His brain, trained on years of Wochenschau newsreels, tries to rearrange the shot into something familiar. Burned-out trams, ration lines, blackout curtains, bomb damage. It finds nothing. Next to him, Weber's fingers tighten on his knees. "Das ist out," he mutters, barely moving his lips. Old footage, before the war. It must be, it has to be. On screen, the camera pans up. A towering movie house marquee glows in the dusk, letters blazing, air-conditioned, tonight only. A couple laughs as they step inside, the man pausing to hold the door. The narrator's voice booms in English, smooth and confident. Mueller catches words like Chicago and this summer. This summer. Not 1938, not before. Now. You can almost feel the room tilt just a fraction. The film jumps to another scene, a factory floor. But it's not the brutal gray industrial hell they've seen in their own propaganda. It's bright, almost shining. Long rows of women in overalls and headscarves stand at conveyor belts, laughing, hands flying as they assemble toasters, radios, refrigerators. Civilian things. Mueller's mind does the math automatically. Steel, copper, electricity, transport, all going to refrigerators and radios, while hundreds of B-17s still cross the channel every day. How? The projector clacks on. The hall smells now of hot metal and warmed wood. A few guards at the back, half in shadow, lean against the wall, arms folded. Even they are watching. On screen, a supermarket, shiny floors, shelves stacked high with canned fruit, coffee, sugar, meat. A housewife pushes a metal cart, smiling, a child perched in the front like a prince on parade. The camera lingers on abundance, bright labels, jars of jam, pyramids of oranges. Someone behind Mueller exhales a word like a prayer. Unmöglich. Impossible. In German cities, women stand for hours in queues for half a loaf and watery soup. Here, an American woman frowns because she can't decide which brand of coffee to buy. For a moment, the POWs forget to hide their faces. Their eyes reflect the screen. Hunger and disbelief sharpen every detail. You can almost taste the canned peaches. The narrator talks of production, of victory gardens, of joining the fight without giving up the American way of life. Weber catches fragments, enough to understand the tone, if not every word. Confidence, calm, no hint of desperation, no strained hysteria of Goebbels screaming about total war. The camera cuts again. Children in a schoolyard, swing sets, baseball, the crack of a bat, the roar of a small crowd. Boys in clean shirts and shorts sprint across a perfect green field, while a flag flutters in the background, reds and whites blazing even in black and white film. This, too, is now. Mueller's teeth clench. Somewhere deep in his chest, something shifts. Not a collapse, not yet, more like the first hairline crack in ice that has always seemed solid. The man 2 rows ahead of him, Untergefreiter Hans Richter, Africa veteran, Iron Cross ribbon frayed at the edges, turns his head just enough for Mueller to see his profile in the flicker. His jaw is working, grinding. Richter has seen Tobruk, El Alamein, Kasserine. He has seen British and American artillery tear German positions apart. He has cursed American factories that never seem to stop. But this is different. Guns, tanks, ships, you can explain those. Industrial capacity, geography, numbers. But this? This is supposed to be the enemy's collapsing society, the rotten, decadent capitalist world that, if you believe the speeches, would fall apart at the first long war. On the bedsheet, a man in a white soda fountain apron hands a young couple 2 towering ice cream sundaes. They laugh. He wipes the counter, not a care on his face. A small radio behind him plays swing music. The hall is dead quiet. Even the mosquitoes seem to have stopped. Weber exhales slowly through his nose. He doesn't look at Mueller. He doesn't need to. The question is in every pair of eyes. If this is America in the middle of a global war, then what else have they been lied to about? The image on the sheet flares white for a heartbeat as the reel changes. In the brief blindness, one of the guards at the back murmurs something to his buddy, a low, amused American drawl that doesn't quite reach the prisoners. The projector coughs, catches, and the light snaps back. This time, not to streets or supermarkets, to something much closer to home. German home. The new reel jerks into motion. The beam shivers, and the picture steadies on something no one in the hall expected. A street, again. But this time it's narrow, familiar, cobbled. A tram line curves between tall stone buildings. Signs in a language every man in that room can read. Bäckerei, Drogerie, Metzgerei. German. Mueller feels his throat tighten. For a heartbeat he thinks, hopes, that the Americans made a mistake and spliced in a captured Wochenschau. Then he sees the corner of the frame. Not the bold Gothic titles of German newsreels, but small English letters. Ruhr Industrial Area, 1943. The camera slowly dollies forward. Shadows of window frames fall across the street like black bars. Then, with a subtle cut, everything is different. The same street, but torn open. One building is halved, floors peeled back like an opened book, private lives spilled into the air, beds dangling, a cupboard hanging, a painting swinging on a broken nail. Stones are dusted in fine gray powder. A twisted tram car lies on its side, windows blown out, wheels off the rails like a toy a giant has kicked. No soundtrack, no heroic music, only the dry, clinical tone of an American narrator. Here, in the heart of Germany's war industry, the Allied air forces have brought the war back to its source. The prisoner's silence turns from wary to rigid. Spines straighten, hands curl around bench edges. Every man is suddenly listening for names, cities, rivers, districts. A close-up, a street sign blasted but still legible under soot. Müller leans forward infinitesimally, squinting. Dortmunder Straße. Behind him, someone sucks in a breath between their teeth. You can almost hear the mental calculations firing in skulls all around the room. Dortmund, Essen, Duisburg, Cologne, places with wives, children, parents. The camera moves over a collapsed rail yard, twisted tracks, burned wagons, a steam locomotive on its side like a dead animal. The American voice speaks of precision attacks and crippling war production. Precision. The lens drifts, almost lazily, across a row of shattered row houses along the tracks. Laundry flaps over a crater. A woman in a headscarf picks through rubble with bare hands, as if she's looking for something small but vital. A ring, a photograph, a child's toy. The camera does not linger on her face. It doesn't need to. Weber's jaw knots so hard his neck tendons stand out. German newsreels had shown bomb damage, of course, but always in controlled doses. Rubble, yes, but framed with slogans about unbroken will, with party officials shaking hands in the streets, with "The Führer cares" captions under shots of party relief stations, and always, always, the promise of revenge. Here, there is no revenge, just the steady, unhurried cataloging of destruction. Despite heavy damage to their factories, the German people are urged by their leaders to believe that the enemy is weak, his society crumbling, his will exhausted. The picture jumps, back to the American supermarket, wide aisles, bright light. A boy reaches up for a box from a shelf overflowing with identical boxes. Then back again. A German bread line snakes around a corner. Women in headscarves and old men with hollow cheeks, standing in gray drizzle. A handwritten sign, "Kein Fleisch heute," no meat today. It's not clever editing that hits them, it's the rhythm, America's now against Germany's now, spliced back to back, over and over like a drumbeat. Abundance, scarcity, smiles, tight jaws. The American narrator never raises his voice. He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. In the United States, he says, over footage of a shiny assembly line turning out washing machines, civilian life continues with minor inconveniences. Rationing is present, but stores remain stocked. Production for war has not required the end of normal life. Minor inconveniences. The words sting more than any insult. Müller feels sweat trickle down his spine despite the stuffy heat. Normal life. The phrase feels almost obscene. He thinks of his wife in Leipzig, her last letter talking about hours in line for potatoes, about synthetic coffee, about air raid sirens that seem never to end. On the sheet, a German apartment block burns like a torch. Firefighters, tiny figures, spray water that seems to vanish before it reaches the flames. A child, hair matted with dust, stares dumbly at the camera, one hand gripping the hem of a nurse's skirt. The projector's fan whirs louder, straining. The guard at the wall shifts his weight, boots creaking. One of the older POWs in front, a captain with a thin, aristocratic face, slowly removes his spectacles, pinches the bridge of his nose, then puts them back on, as if he had hoped the image would blur when he opened his eyes. It doesn't. It will be the factories that decide this war, and the American factory, supplied by a peaceful and thriving home front, will not stop. No hint of doubt, no talk of if. Will not stop. For months, maybe years, men like Müller had been fed another picture, that America was a colossus with feet of clay, jazz and gangsters, unemployment and strikes, racial violence and decadence. A diseased giant whose inner rot would be revealed the moment real sacrifice was demanded. But the reels in this hot wooden hall say something else. The giant is not only standing, he is walking to work every morning, kissing his wife at the door, buying groceries on the way home, and still sending ships, tanks, and bombers across an ocean without losing his smile. You can almost feel the propaganda slogans wither in the stale air. Behind Mueller, someone whispers, too low for the guards, but loud enough for 3 rows to hear. Wenn das stimmt. If that's true. He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. If that's true, then the war Germany is fighting is not the war they were promised, not a short, hard, heroic struggle against weak, decadent enemies, but a slow, grinding match against a nation that can make refrigerators and bombers at the same time. On screen, a group of American women in factory overalls wave at the camera. One flexes her arm in a joking pose. Behind them, a sign, "Our boys bring it home, we help them win." Weber finally turns his head a fraction towards Mueller. His voice is a rasp, barely audible over the projector. "Erinnerst du dich, was die uns erzählt haben, von Hunger in Amerika?" Do you remember what they told us about hunger in America? Mueller swallows. The answer is yes. He remembers the posters, the speeches, the earnest young party functionary in their barracks telling them how American workers lived in misery, how their capitalist masters starved them while German socialism fed and clothed its people. He stares at the woman in the supermarket on the screen, indecisive between 2 brands of coffee. Who is starving? The reel runs on. A bombed-out German rail junction dissolves into an American rail station packed with soldiers and civilians, banners reading "See you soon" and "Welcome home" flapping in the breeze. Fresh uniforms, shined boots, a brass band plays. That's when he feels it properly, the thing that's been forming since the first shot of that sunlit American street. Not awe, not envy, a cold, leaden weight in the gut. Because this isn't just about who has more food or nicer shops, it's about time, endurance, the long breath. If America can live like this and wage war like that, how long can Germany last? The reel sputters. The last frames blur, then burn white at one edge before the light snaps off. The hall plunges into near darkness, the afterimage of fire and supermarkets still hanging on the prisoners' retinas. For a moment, no one moves. Then the bulb flicks back on. The projectionist is swapping reels again. A guard at the back chuckles and says something about the next feature in easy, careless English. Beside the projector, an American lieutenant confers with a man in a chaplain's collar, both of them glancing at the prisoners. They're not just entertaining them, they're watching them, measuring the silence. The chaplain nods once, as if satisfied. The next reel will not be a documentary. It will be something else entirely. If the first films have cracked the German story, the one that follows will test what, if anything, they still believe. The next reel starts without ceremony. No fresh announcement, no change in the guard's posture, just the familiar rattle of film threading through metal teeth and the soft click as the projector lamp flares. Light spears across the hall again, carving a path through smoke and dust and blooms against the bedsheet. This time, there's no newsreel logo, no maps, no captions. Just a title drifting across the screen in bold, flowing letters. Coming Home. English words, but simple enough that even the men with the poorest language skills can piece them together. Coming Home. A murmur, barely audible, shivers through the back rows. A few of these men haven't been home in years. First Russia, then Africa, then Italy or Normandy. Marches, transports, captivity. The phrase touches something raw. Then the film opens on a railway station. Not the choked, bomb-scarred platforms of Cologne or Hamburg, but a clean, open American station bathed in afternoon light. Flags flutter. A brass band plays. The camera tracks along a line of women and old men holding signs. "Welcome back, Johnny. We're proud of you." A train pulls in with a long, musical squeal of brakes. Doors swing open. Soldiers spill out in pressed uniforms, duffel bags slung over shoulders. The crowd surges forward. The hall full of POWs leans, almost as one, toward the screen. The lens finds one soldier in particular. Tall, dark-haired, his cap tilted, a sergeant's chevrons on his sleeve. He stops on the platform, scanning faces. For a second, his expression is uncertain, vulnerable. Then a woman breaks from the crowd, hair pinned neatly, summer dress catching the light, and throws herself into his arms. The music swells. She kisses him shamelessly in front of everyone. The crowd cheers. A ripple goes through the Germans, shock, amusement, something else. This is not how men return from the front in their world. In Germany, the homecoming, if it happens at all, is quiet, reserved. A nod at the station, a handshake, perhaps a shy embrace behind a door. Not this explosion of public joy. You can almost feel the awkward discomfort in the benches. Yet no one looks away. On screen, the American sergeant and his girl walk out of the station into a small town, bathed in golden evening light. White clapboard houses, picket fences, a drugstore with a striped awning. Kids play baseball in the street, making way for the returning soldiers like 1,000 times before. There is no rubble, no craters, no handwritten signs announcing air raid shelters, just unbroken glass and painted wood. The Germans have seen images like this in captured magazines, in pre-war postcards. But now the same world moves, breathes, laughs in front of them. The camera glides into a diner. The newly returned sergeant sits in a booth, his cap on the seat beside him. His girl fusses with the menu, while a waitress pours coffee into cups that gleam white and unchipped. A jukebox hums in the background. Snatches of swing float through the dialogue. The POWs strain to follow the English. They miss words, swallow phrases, but the gist seeps through. He's been away. He's seen combat. He's tired. But now he's back, and the Count is throwing him a welcome party. Mueller catches the rhythm of the conversation rather than its details, the easy teasing, the lack of ceremony, the sense that this man can speak of his war as openly as he chooses without fear of censors or party officials. When he pictures German soldiers coming home, those who still can, he does not imagine speeches like this. He imagines quiet questions, half-truths, glances over shoulders. The American sergeant worries out loud, this much is clear, about finding work again, about whether things have changed too much. His girl laughs, touches his hand, tells him the factory has a job waiting. "They kept your spot," she says. "The factory boss felt it was the least he could do." The camera cuts to that factory. Not some soot-blackened war plant ringed with flak towers, but a neat brick building with big windows, sunlight spilling in across workbenches. The owner, in a pressed shirt and tie, greets the sergeant with a handshake and a grin. "I told you we'd be waiting," his mouth shapes. The POWs stare. In Germany, the war has devoured every industry, every man. Factories retooled, workers shifted, lives redirected towards one thing only: survival through victory. "After the war" has become a phrase that means in a hazy, probably unreachable future. Here, after the war is concrete: a job, a paycheck, a place at a workbench that was kept empty out of principle. You can almost hear the question forming in 100 heads. How do you defeat a country that can afford this kind of sentimentality in the middle of total war? The film does not hammer the point, it simply shows a life. The sergeant's parents in a tidy home with framed pictures on the walls, a radio in the corner, a table heavy with food for a welcome home dinner. His younger brother, too young to fight, talking about baseball and school, and maybe enlisting when his time comes. There's a scene at a local movie theater. The marquee blazes with the title of another Hollywood film. The returning soldiers get in for free. Popcorn rustles in paper bags. The audience laughs in the dark. In Germany, cinemas still show films, but the experience is different. Warnings, air raid notices, blackouts. Sometimes the film stops because the sirens start. Here, war feels compartmentalized, present but not devouring. Halfway through the American movie, there's a scene that lands like a quiet hammer blow on the men in the Texas hall. The sergeant sits under a tree by the river with his girl. He talks, not in bombastic speeches, but in halting human sentences about what he's seen, about friends lost, about fear, about doubt. He says something about not understanding what it was all for sometimes. And she doesn't shush him with slogans. She listens. She admits she was afraid too. She says maybe no one really understands, not completely, but they can try to build something better when it's over. Better. The word hangs in the stale air above the POWs like smoke. What have they been told to build after the war? A purified empire, a 1,000-year Reich, a future measured in steel and flags and conquered territory. Not better. Mueller's hands knot together without him realizing it. He is not thinking about politics. He is thinking about his wife the last time he saw her, standing on a cold platform in Leipzig, her eyes already tired. No diner, no jukebox, no talk of after, only when will you write and the baby's cough is getting worse. On the sheet, the American small town throws a dance for its returning soldiers. Banners hang from the town hall. A local band plays. The sergeant and his girls spin under string lights, laughter and music blurring into something that looks unmistakably like joy. Not staged joy for a camera, not party-approved demonstrations with flags on cue, just people celebrating because their sons came home. The POWs sit motionless. A few of them have seen victory parades in Berlin in '40, the roar of planned enthusiasm, the carefully arranged ranks of Hitler Youth, the scripted speeches. This, whatever it is, doesn't feel like that. Is it propaganda? Of course, everything on film in wartime is, even this. But for the first time, many of them find themselves asking a different question. What if this propaganda is built on not lies, but on a truth they were never allowed to see? Near the back, a young private with a soft Saxon accent mutters almost to himself, "Wenn sie sich das leisten können in Krieg." If they can afford this in war. He doesn't finish. He doesn't need to. If America can have this life, this ease, this confidence in tomorrow while pouring out men and machines on 3 continents, what does that say about the balance no general's map can show? The film begins to wind towards its sentimental end, weddings hinted at, jobs secured, the future a bright highway stretching into an American sunset. It is sugary, optimistic, everything Nazi propagandists sneer at when they talk about Hollywood illusions. But in this hot, cramped hall behind barbed wire, the sugar has teeth. When the sergeant and his bride-to-be stand before a small-town pastor in the final scene, sunlight slanting through church windows, Mueller finds himself staring not at their faces, but at the background, the pews, the polished wood, the flowers. Everything intact. Everything waiting. The vows spoken in English mean less to him than the simple fact that this world exists and expects to go on existing after the war. For the first time, he feels something new coiling under the numbness of captivity. Not just doubt, a creeping, reluctant certainty that a line has been crossed inside him, one he cannot step back over. The film fades to black. Applause erupts from the American guards at the back, joined by a few scattered, embarrassed claps from POWs who react on instinct to the end of a performance. The lights in the hall do not come up, not yet. Instead, the projector hums again. Another reel is ready. Shorts maybe, cartoons, newsreel fragments. The Americans intend to keep the show going, to keep the images coming, because they know something the Germans are only now beginning to feel in their bones. A war can be lost long before the last shot is fired, if the men fighting it stop believing their future is possible. And for some, in this Texas camp, that belief is starting to slip. The siren that ends the film night is not loud, just a sharp, metallic whistle from the front of the hall, followed by a shouted order in English. "That's it for tonight, fellas. Back to your blocks." The bedsheet goes blank. The projector light snaps off. For a moment, the prisoners sit in a gray limbo. the afterglow of American sunsets and small-town weddings still burning on the backs of their eyes. Then the world resolves into the crude shapes of the recreation hall: rafters, benches, the glint of a guard's belt buckle. Wood scrapes, boots thump. The spell breaks. Mueller stands automatically, his knees stiff from 2 hours on the hard bench. The heat has left his shirt damp under his armpits, the collar limp. Around him, men shift, stretch, cough. Voices rise, but quietly, as if the film's silence has laid a kind of muffling cloth over them. "Raus, los," one of the guards barks, gesturing with 2 fingers toward the door. His tone is brisk, but not cruel. The MPs form a loose funnel, shepherding the POWs back out into the warm Texas night. Outside, the air hits them like a soft wave. Crickets sing. Somewhere, far off, a train whistles. Above the wire, the sky is thick with stars, hard and bright in the dry dark. You can almost feel lungs expanding. Men who didn't realize the hall had felt suffocating suddenly drag in deeper breaths. The column shuffles along the packed earth path between barracks, boots scuffing dust. Guards walk alongside, rifles slung, chatting among themselves about baseball scores and that new picture with Gary Cooper. Their words skate over the German ears around them like stones over water, caught in fragments, understood only in pieces. But the mood among the POWs is different. Normally, after evening roll call or a work detail, there's a hum, a low buzz of grumbling, joking, the practiced obscenities of soldiers filling dead space. Tonight, the sound is flattened, subdued. Halfway to their block, Weber leans close enough to Mueller that their shoulders brush. He doesn't look at him. His mouth barely moves. Kein Wort hier. No words here. Mueller nods the smallest fraction. He understands. The open ground between barracks is not the place. Too many ears, too many eyes in the watchtowers, their outlines sharp against the starlit sky. Inside the barrack, the door thuds shut behind the last man. The familiar smells hit: sweat, straw, musty blankets, the faint tang of old boots. As the guard's footsteps recede, a collective exhale seems to pass through the room. Someone lights a cigarette. The brief flare paints a thin, scarred face in orange. Richter, the Africa veteran. He draws in smoke like a man dragging air down into a collapsed mine. "Licht aus in 5 Minuten," comes the shout from outside. "Lights out in 5. The bulb hanging from the ceiling throws a sickly yellow pool over the central aisle. Men sit on bunks, unbuttoning tunics, easing off boots. A few, by habit more than hope, reach for letters to reread in the last moments of light. Nobody mentions the films. Not yet. That in itself is strange. Weber sits on the edge of the lower bunk, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands. The silence stretches, taut as wire. Finally, he breaks it. "Alt Material," he says, too loudly. "Old footage." A couple of heads turn. Everyone understands what he's doing, offering the first safe explanation, the party line their brains have been trained to grab. One of the younger men on the opposite bunk, Jaeger, barely 20, baby fat not entirely gone from his cheeks, latches on. "Natürlich, die Eisbäcker, das war vor dem Krieg. Sie wollen uns, wie sagt man, beeindrucken." Of course, the supermarkets, the ice cream, that was before the war. They want to impress us. The word hangs there, impress. Mueller looks up slowly. He remembers the caption, "Chicago, this summer," the way the American narrator's voice had rolled over the words "this year" when talking about production figures. The film's clean, unbroken confidence that all this was now. "Vielleicht ist es beides," he says quietly. "Maybe it's both." Weber's eyes flick to him. "Beides?" "Propaganda," Mueller says, choosing each word like stepping stones in a fast stream. Propaganda, but keine Lüge. A knot lodges. A snort comes from the top bunk above him. The captain with a thin face, von Harten, peers down with one eyebrow raised. American fairy stories impressed you, did they? There's a reflexive chuckle from a few throats. Rank still carries weight here. Being seen to be too credulous, too shaken is dangerous, for pride if nothing else. But von Harten doesn't sound entirely convinced by his own sarcasm. His fingers drum against the bunk slats, a restless tapping. "What did you see, Herr Hauptmann?" Richter asks from the corner, his cigarette ember a small planet in the dimness. "Ich meine, wirklich gesehen. I mean, what did you really see?" The question hangs. The bulb flicks once, twice, a warning. 2 minutes. Von Harten exhales through his nose. His voice, when he answers, is softer. "I saw," he pauses, "I saw that our cities look like their war, and their cities look like our peace." The distinction lands like a stone in a pond, ripples spreading through the cramped space. You can almost feel walls shift inside skulls. "They showed our bomb damage," Jäger says quickly, defensive. "Das ist auch Propaganda. Sie wollen uns demoralisieren." They want to demoralize us. "They didn't have to show us anything," Richter counters. "The RAF already did." His tone is flat, the humor long burned out of it. "I saw Hamburg last year. That film tonight was mild." He stubs the cigarette on a scrap of cardboard, saving the butt for later. No one wastes tobacco here. "Propaganda, demoralisieren," Weber repeats the words, as if testing their weight. "Vielleicht, aber..." He looks up at the bare rafters. "Was, wenn das gar nicht nötig ist? What if it's not even necessary?" Silence again. "What do you mean?" Mueller asks. Weber's mouth twists into something that isn't quite a smile. "I mean, vielleicht reicht es, wenn sie uns nur ihre Wirklichkeit zeigen. Maybe it's enough if they just show us their reality." The bulb flickers a last time and dies. Darkness washes over the room, soft and total, save for the faint glow leaking through knotholes in the walls from the outside floodlights. In the dark, tongues loosen. It's always been that way. In trenches, in foxholes, now in barracks. Men say things they wouldn't risk under the bright, impartial stare of a bare bulb. From the far end of the room, a low voice starts, half mocking. "Der Führer hat gesagt, Amerika ist schwach." The Führer said America is weak. A few men chuckle. Another voice cuts in, mimicking Goebbels's feverish cadence. "Ein Koloss auf turnenden Füßen." A colossus with clay feet. Laughter this time, but it's not warm. It has an edge. It sounds like men poking at a corpse to make sure it's really dead. "Tonfüße mit Piddenschrinken," someone mutters. "Clay feet with refrigerators." The line gets a few real laughs now, quick and guilty. Laughter as pressure valve, as small private rebellion. "You saw those trains," a man near the middle says in the dark, voice tight. "Die Fabriken, die Supermärkte. Glaubt ihr wirklich, dass so ein Land zusammenbricht? Do you really think a country like that collapses?" The question hovers, naked. No one answers immediately. Eventually, von Harten speaks, his aristocratic polish stripped away by the dark. "Countries don't win wars by having pretty shops," he says. "Sie gewinnen sie mit Stahl, Ale, Männern." They win them with steel, oil, men. "Sie haben das alles auch," Richter replies. "They have all that too." In the quiet that follows, you can almost hear a ledger being updated in 100 private minds. On one side, faith, duty, orders, the old story of German superiority. On the other, refrigerators, full store shelves, wedding plans during wartime, factories that promise a job after. Which column is growing? Which is shrinking? From outside comes the faint jingle of an American radio in a guard hut. Big band music, bright and careless. It seeps through the wooden walls like a ghost of the world they've just seen on screen.
Jäger shifts on his bunk. His voice, when it comes, is small. Vielleicht gibt es ja Dinge, die sie uns nie gesagt haben. Maybe there are things they never told us. Nobody answers. They don't need to. Because in the dark, with the echo of American dreams still flickering behind their eyes, many of them are thinking the forbidden thought. If our leaders lied about the enemy's weakness, what else have they lied about? Sleep, when it comes, is thin and restless. And when morning breaks over Camp Swift, Texas, with its bugles and counts and routines,
Reveille in Camp Swift comes like it always does, sudden, brash, indifferent to dreams. A bugle's hard notes slice through the pale dawn, bouncing off tin roofs and barbed wire. Men groan, blankets rustle, boots thump onto wooden floors. From the outside, this morning is the same as 100 others. Dust in the air, the sour smell of latrines. Guards calling, let's go, in that half-lazy, half-alert American cadence. But inside a few skulls, something small and crucial has shifted. Mueller swings his legs over the bunk, feeling the stiffness in his back. He barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, images pressed in, not of battlefields or burning tanks, but of supermarket aisles and string lights at a town dance. That, more than anything, makes him uneasy. He was trained to compartmentalize fear, of shells, of mines, of Soviet tanks appearing out of morning mist. Those things fit in the soldier's world. You could put courage between yourself and them, like armor. What armor do you use against someone else's peace? They dress, they file out. Roll call in the yard is a familiar dance. Names barked, numbers checked, the small ceremony of captivity. The sun climbs quickly in the Texas sky, burning off the last threads of dawn coolness. An American lieutenant walks the line, clipboard under his arm, eyes skimming faces. Habit, not hostility. He stops now and then to exchange a word with the sergeant in charge, occasionally glancing toward the row of barracks that house the politicals, the hardliners, the ones who still give the Hitler salute when nobody's looking. He knows last night's films didn't hit all men the same way. They don't have to. After roll call, work details are assigned. Kitchen duty, maintenance, the never-ending task of moving earth from one pointless place to another. But for a small group, including Mueller and Weber, there's a different order. Interview room, the sergeant says, pointing with his pencil. Chaplain wants a word. You. The chosen men exchange glances. This is not new. The American chaplain and the camp's intelligence officer have been talking to POWs for months about faith, about home, about what you think of all this. Sometimes it seems pastoral, sometimes like interrogation with a softer face. Today it will be something else, a temperature check. How hot did last night's images burn? The interview room is just a converted office near the gate. Inside it's surprisingly cool. A ceiling fan turns slowly, clicking at one point in its circle. An American flag hangs on one wall, a simple wooden cross on another. Between them, a map of Europe bristles with pins. The chaplain is there, the sandy-haired man with deep lines at the corners of his eyes, and beside him, in shirt sleeves, the same lieutenant who watched the POWs during the screening. On the table, a stack of forms, a box of pencils, a metal ashtray. Guten Morgen, gentlemen, the chaplain says in careful schoolroom German. Please, sit. They do, on simple chairs facing the table. The door closes with a soft click. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the Filme gestern Abend, the films last night. There are no right or wrong answers, nur Ihre Meinung, only your opinion. Everyone in the room knows that no right or wrong answers is never entirely true in a war. But the chaplain's eyes are steady, curious rather than predatory. He slides the top form to Mueller. It's a questionnaire, short, deceptively simple. What did you think of the films? Were they believable? How does life in America compare in your view to life in Germany before the war? What do you think about the chances of Germany winning the war? Mueller stares at that last line for a beat too long. He feels the lieutenant watching him, not aggressively, but with intent, measuring like a doctor reading a thermometer. He thinks of the textbooks from his youth, the speeches, the big promises written in Gothic letters. Then he thinks of the woman in the American supermarket, spoiled for choice between brands of coffee, of the neat factory kept ready for the returning sergeant. He thinks of Leipzig under sirens, of his wife's cramped handwriting. We stood 3 hours for bread today. The children cried from hunger, but there was nothing to give them until evening. His pencil hovers. How honest can a prisoner be? How honest can a man be with himself? Es ist anonym, the chaplain says gently, as if sensing the hesitation. It's anonymous. Wir wollen nur verstehen. We want to understand. Mueller almost laughs. Understand what? Whether the cracks in their belief are hairline or spreading. He writes, carefully. Not a confession, not a manifesto, just small, edged truths. The films were surprising. Parts of them seemed exaggerated, but much felt real. If America's home front is truly like this, it will be very difficult for Germany to win. He does not write impossible. Some stubborn core in him refuses to betray the last thin thread of loyalty in that way. But the Americans don't need the word. The implication is enough. Beside him, Weber writes faster, his jaw clenched. When he finishes, he sets his pencil down with a little more force than necessary. All finished? The lieutenant asks in English. At their nods, he collects the papers, tapping them into a neat stack. He doesn't read them yet. There will be time for that later, with markers and red underlines. Danke, the chaplain says. Eine Frage mündlich, ja? One question spoken, yes? He folds his hands. Do you think the Führer knows how life in America really is? The question slices through the air sharper than any accusation. Weber blinks. Mueller feels something tighten in his chest. It's one thing to question America, another to drag the man at the center of everything into that same frame. Von oben nach unten, from top to bottom, the entire story of their war has been built on the idea that he sees farther, knows more, understands the world in ways ordinary men cannot. If he knows America's strength and keeps telling them it is weak, or if he doesn't know it all, both paths end in the same place. Mueller wets his lips. The safe answer is obvious. Of course he knows. Our leadership understands everything. American life is a facade, a show for the camera. The words don't quite fit in his mouth anymore. I don't know what he knows, Mueller says slowly, aber was wir gestern gesehen haben, but what we saw yesterday. He trails off, searching for ground that isn't treason or delusion. Das haben sie uns zu Hause nie gezeigt. They never showed us that at home. The chaplain holds his gaze for a moment, then nods as if that is exactly the sentence he was listening for. He doesn't press. He doesn't need to. The admission is there, hanging, a gap between what was told and what is now seen. Inside that gap, whole empires can fall. When they're dismissed, stepping back into the sunlight, Weber walks in silence until they're clear of the office. Then he breathes out, a harsh little sound. Clever, these Pfaffen. Clever, these priests. What did you write? Mueller asked. Weber shrugged. Genug. Enough. Nicht alles. Not everything. They both know it doesn't matter. The Americans don't need complete honesty from every man. They need trends, patterns, a sense of how far the mental ground has shifted. In another building, the lieutenant lays their forms on a table next to a dozen others. Some are defiant, some indifferent, some quietly shaken. He reads, underlines, makes notes in the margins. He is not thinking in terms of souls or ideologies. He is thinking in probabilities. How many will stop trying to escape? How many will start telling the truth in interrogations? How many, when the war is over, will go back to Germany willing to say, in taverns and workplaces and at kitchen tables, we were lied to? In the camp yard, the day unrolls. Work, chow, jokes traded over thin soup. On a makeshift soccer field, men shout and run, the ball skittering over dust. To a casual visitor, it looks like any other POW camp, any other day. But last night's films linger like smoke. When someone spits out an old slogan, Sieg Heil, in jest, a muttered, the Führer will have an answer, the laughter that follows has changed flavor. It's not the laughter of belief.
It's the brittle sound men make when they realize a story that held their world together might not survive contact with reality. War is often drawn as arrows on maps, fronts moving, divisions lost and reinforced. But sitting on his bunk that evening, turning the chipped metal cup in his hands, Mueller senses another, quieter front line, the one that runs through what men think is possible. The Americans, with their projectors and questionnaires and supermarket reels, are attacking there, patiently, systematically. Last night they didn't just show the enemy's strength. They showed it in a way that invited a terrible, forbidden comparison. If this is how they live in war, what does that say about how we've been told to live and die for hours?
The American newspapers arrive in camp the way everything does here, on someone else's schedule, in someone else's language. Bundles tossed from a truck, carried under an MP's arm, stacked in the camp office before being filtered, censored, selectively shared. Most POWs never touch them. They see only clippings pinned to the bulletin board, casualty figures, communiques, maps with broad arrows. But some men have been marked out as useful, men who can read English without stumbling, men like Mueller. It starts a few days after the film night. He's sweeping the corridor near the camp headquarters, one of the dull, harmless jobs they assign to prisoners deemed cooperative, when a voice calls from an open doorway. "Hey, Corporal, you, the Leipzig fella, come here a second." It's the same American lieutenant from the screening in the interviews. His jacket is off, sleeves rolled, tie loosened. On his desk lays a spread of newspapers, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, and a stack of mimeographed sheets headed "For German distribution only." "Need a little help," the lieutenant says, tapping the German translation sheets with his knuckle. "We're picking which stories to share in camp. You read English pretty well, right?" Mueller hesitates. This feels different from sweeping, closer to something. Still, he steps in. The room smells of paper and coffee and cigarette smoke. A staff officer's war. On the wall, the map of Europe now has fresh annotations in blue pencil. The line on the Eastern Front had bent westward again. "Here," the lieutenant pushes one of the American papers toward him, finger marking a column. "Tell me what you'd call this. Big news? Little news? Does it hurt, you know?" He taps his own chest with a faint smile. "In here." Mueller bends over the page. His eyes track across columns crammed with a language that a few years ago had meant jazz records and technical manuals and the occasional pre-war novel. Now it is the language of the other side of the guns. Headlines jump out. Yanks push deeper into France. Red Army nears East Prussia. Nazis face all-out bombing. There is a small photograph of a familiar silhouette, a long, lean man in goggles and cap, peering over the side of a staff car in desert dust. The caption, "Rommel reported dead after an accident in Germany." Something tightens behind Mueller's ribs. "Field Marshal Rommel," the lieutenant says, seeing where his eyes have gone. His tone is neutral, almost conversational. "You're Wüstenfuchs, right? Desert Fox?" Mueller has seen the image of the man 100 times, on cigarette cards, in newsreels, in proud features about Unser Rommel in the Wehrmacht magazines. A hero carefully crafted, turned into shorthand for German daring in the desert. In Germany, the official statement called it a car accident, a tragedy, a national loss. Here, the copy is blunt. Sources say Rommel was forced to take poison after being implicated in July plot against Hitler. The words swim for a second. Mueller feels his hand tighten on the broom handle. "What would it do to your men," the lieutenant asks quietly, "if they read this version?" The question is clinical, not cruel, another probe of the fault lines. Mueller forces himself to read the paragraph again. He pictures the men in his barrack, the joking Sieg Heils that have started to sound like they're coming from far away. He thinks of the little line that runs through every German soldier's mind. Even if the war goes badly, there are still men like Rommel, men who see clearly, men who might what? Fix things? Save something? Intervene? If even such a man ended like this, not as a distant martyr in a heroic last stand, but as a quiet, coerced suicide in some forest house, What does that say about the world they serve? Mueller clears his throat. Das would be strong, he says in halting English. Stärker than bombing pictures. Stronger. The lieutenant nods slowly, making a mark on one of the translation sheets. Yeah, that's what we figured. For the German leaflets to be posted in camp, the Rommel story is trimmed, softened at the edges. It does not use words like forced or poison. It speaks instead of conflict within the German leadership and tragic consequences after July 20. But the core remains. Your brightest general did not fall in battle. He fell in a struggle with the very regime you were told was unbreakable. When the leaflet goes up on the camp board 2 days later, a small knot of men gathers. They read in silence. No one says his name aloud. In Germany, Rommel had been a safe word to enthuse over, a way to express pride without sounding like a shouting party man. Here, his name tastes different. On the edge of the group, Weber's jaw works. He looks once at Mueller, and in that glance an entire unspoken sentence passes. If even he... They move away separately. No discussion, not there, not in front of the board, not under the eyes of guards and informers. But in the barracks that night, the conversation circles, not about Rommel himself, but about what has become impossible to ignore. The story they were given about the war, about its leaders, its invincibility, its clean arcs of destiny, has begun to fracture. The films showed one kind of crack, the gap between German hardship and American abundance. The Rommel clipping shows another, the gap between the official legend and the private reality at the top. Somewhere far across the ocean, tanks still move, artillery still speaks, men still die in forests and hedgerows and city ruins. On every map and every headquarters, the war is a question of divisions and fuel and terrain. But in Camp Swift, Texas, a different calculus is underway. How many hidden breaks like this can a belief system take before it stops carrying weight? How many little shocks, an American supermarket, a small-town wedding, a general's quiet death, does it take before a soldier, lying awake on a hard bunk, stops thinking, when we win, and starts thinking, with a strange, hollow calm, when this is over and we have lost? The first time the word re-education appears on paper, it looks almost harmless. A notice goes up on the camp board one cool morning, alongside the usual work rosters and Red Cross bulletins. The heading is in English and German both, blocky and official. Voluntary discussion groups for German prisoners. Freiwillige Diskussionskreise für deutsche Kriegsgefangene. Mueller reads it twice. The language is careful, sanded smooth. Talks about democracy, about life after the war in Germany, about responsibility and new beginnings. Participation is voluntary, no effect on rations, treatment, or repatriation, the poster insists, which only proves to most eyes that it will affect something. Why deny what nobody has yet accused you of? Behind him, someone scoffs. "Look at that," says a voice thick with the Rhineland. "Now they want to teach us how to be good little Demokraten." There's a murmur of dark amusement. But woven into it now is something that wasn't there months ago. Not just defiance, curiosity. The Americans don't start with big speeches. They start with little invitations. Small groups, the chaplain explains that afternoon, sitting on a crate in the yard with a Bible on his knee and a cigarette in his fingers. 10 men at a time, twice a week. A room, a blackboard, coffee. German books and newspapers from before 1933. "Wir wollen nur reden," he says. We just want to talk. Talk, the most dangerous and most ordinary word in the world. That night in the barrack, the notice circulates in conversation like a strange new coin. Weber turns it over in his hand, literally and mentally, then flicks it back onto Mueller's blanket. First die Filme, dann die Fragebögen, now Kaffee und Bücher. Very generous. His tone is mocking, but Mueller can hear the strain underneath. "What are you afraid of?" asks Richter from his bunk, voice dry. "That a book might bite you?" Weber bristles, sits up. "I'm not afraid. I just don't feel like being, unterrichtet. schooled like a child. Then treat it like reconnaissance, Richter says. We always said, learn everything about the enemy you can. Maybe it's finally time we take our own advice. The argument fizzles, unresolved. But when names are taken the next day, Mueller notices something. The list of volunteers is not empty. It's not full either. Maybe 15 men out of their whole block. Some out of boredom, some out of genuine interest, some out of a fuzzy, half-formed feeling that the world they left behind might not be the same one they returned to. He writes his own name down slowly, the pencil feeling heavier than its weight. The discussion room is in a low wooden hut near the infirmary. Inside, the Americans have done something that feels almost theatrical. On one wall, a map of Germany, not shaded by battle lines, just city names and rivers. On another, a pinboard covered with clippings and pages, pre-1933 newspapers, Weimar posters, photographs of Berlin streets without swastikas, cafes, theaters, election rallies full of parties whose names now feel like fossils. On a table, coffee in metal urns, real sugar in a bowl, a plate of plain cookies. It looks absurdly like some student club at a small-town university. A civilian in a tweed jacket introduces himself in careful German as Dr. Harris, Historiker. Next to him, the chaplain. A translator sits to one side, hardly needed. By now, many of the POWs understand enough English to navigate. Today, Dr. Harris says, we don't talk about Hitler or Roosevelt or Churchill. Today, we talk about Weimar. The word lands strangely in German ears, a ghost from civics classes and old jokes about weak governments and cabarets. What was wrong with it, he asks. Why did you want something else? At first, the answers come easy, worn smooth from years of repetition. It was chaotic. It was humiliated. It was all knives and no bread. Good, Harris says, writing the words neatly on chalk. And what was right with it? This time, the silence is thicker. What do you mean, right? One of the older men snorts. It failed. Many things that fail still have parts that work, Harris answers calmly. If you are going to build something new in Germany after this war, will you build only from 1933 or also from davor, before? The question is not about loyalty or treason. It is about architecture. What bricks you choose when the old house has fallen. They spend an hour like this, not being told but being asked, about local elections their fathers once voted in, about trade unions their uncles joined, about books that disappeared from shelves after 1933. Every so often, Harris drops a small stone into the pool. What newspapers could you buy in your town in 1928 and in 1938? What did you gain? What did you lose? Mueller finds himself answering, slowly, pulled along by the logic of it. He remembers his father coming home after a town meeting, grumbling about communists and monarchists and Catholics all talking at once. He also remembered the year the meeting stopped, replaced by a single uniformed man making announcements. Things were simpler, yes, but like many simple things in war, the simplification came with a price that only becomes clear when you count the dead. When the session ends, they file out into the sunlight, dizzy like men coming up from a cellar. Nothing spectacular has happened. No oaths were broken, no flags burned. Yet something has shifted another notch. They have, for the first time in years, spoken of Germany not as a fortress surrounded by enemies, but as a place that had been many things, could be many things again. On the way back to the barrack, Weber walks in silence beside Mueller, hands in his pockets. Finally, he asks, almost grudgingly, "Well?" Mueller searches for the right word. "Unangenehm," he says, "uncomfortable." Then, after a beat, "aber notwendig," necessary. In his mind, Rommel's face from the newspaper clipping floats beside a black and white photo Harris pinned on the wall, a Berlin street full of party posters from 1932. So many promises, so many arrows pointing in different directions. The myth of the single infallible path is cracking, and in the thin light that seeps through those cracks, another more dangerous idea begins to form. If Germany can be different than it is now,
then perhaps the war is not just about who wins, but what it will mean to be German when the shooting stops.
The next discussion session doesn't mention Rommel by name. It doesn't have to. His shadow walks into the room with every German uniform, especially the Africa veterans who still carry a little desert in their eyes. On the table today, alongside the coffee and the cookies, lies a neat stack of pamphlets in German. The title makes Mueller's throat tighten. Der Offizier und der Staat, the officer and the state. Dr. Harris holds one up between thumb and forefinger. Today, he says, we talk about what it means to be an officer when the men above you are wrong. The air sharpens, chairs creak. No one says Hitler, no one says Rommel, but both names are suddenly very loud in the silence. Harris doesn't start in 1933, he goes back to Prussian officers who resigned rather than fire on civilians in 1848, to generals in 1918 who refused to waste men on obviously hopeless attacks. He sketches quick vignettes on the blackboard, dates, names, choices. Some in the room nod, they remember fragments from school. Others stare surprised, as if someone is showing them rooms in their own house they never knew existed. Then Harris draws a simple line down the board, splitting it in two. On the left, he writes Gehorsam, obedience. On the right, Verantwortung, responsibility. Your training, he says, emphasized this side, yes? He taps Gehorsam, obey the order, execute the plan, trust the leadership. No one disagrees. And this side, he taps Verantwortung, responsibility, not just for the order, but for the consequences, for the men, for the country. That is also in your tradition, he says quietly. But it has been, wie sagt man, underfed. A ripple of uneasy laughter. Underfed, like children in bombed cities. He turns, wipes his hands on a cloth. Let us talk hypothetically, he says. Imagine a very successful general, very popular with the troops. A hero. A hero. He sees that the war cannot be won. He sees that the man above him refuses to face this. The earth is utterly still. Was ist richtig? He asks. What is right? The sergeant from Bremen answers first, rough-voiced. He must still obey, that is his oath. And if his obedience helps destroy the country, Harris asks, if it costs 100,000 lives more than necessary. That is not his fault, the sergeant insists. He's a soldier. Convenient, Richter mutters under his breath. Harris hears him. He smiles slightly. Would you say it louder, please? Richter's jaw flexes. Then he shrugs. We like heroes, he says, especially heroes who say, I had no choice. It means none of us ever has to ask what we ourselves would have done. The words hang there, heavier than any slogan. Harris nods slowly. In every country, he says, we make stories about our officers. In America, too. About brave men, brilliant men. Sometimes we make them too clean, too easy. But after a war like this, he lets the sentence trail off, then finishes it in German. Nach so einem Krieg müssen Sie entscheiden, wollen Sie Helden oder Erwachsene? After such a war, you must decide, do you want heroes or adults? The jab lands deeper than any statistic. Heroes are simple. Adults have to live with what they knew and when they knew it. He doesn't mention Rommel. Instead, he slides one of the pamphlets across to Mueller. Inside is a short essay, unsigned, about a fictional field marshal who becomes a symbol in the newspapers while privately doubting the course of the war. The details are altered just enough to call it fiction, but every man in that room knows exactly who they are reading. The essay doesn't smear him. It doesn't call him coward or traitor. It does something far more subversive. It presents him as a man who saw more clearly than the regime he served and still could not or did not step entirely outside it until it was too late. A tragic figure, a caution, not a comfort. Mueller feels the ground inside him tilt another few degrees. In the desert, in the newsreels, Desert Fox meant possibility, the idea that German genius might outthink material inferiority, that somewhere someone was in control. Here, on cheap American paper in a Texas hut, the fox is recast as something else. Proof that even the clearest eyes can be trapped inside a bad story too long.
On the walk back, the men don't talk much. When they do, it's fragmented, defensive. "He fought well," someone says. No one denies that. Maybe that is the problem. How can fighting well be a problem when you are fighting for something that eats its own generals? Weber says little. His face is hard, but Mueller recognizes the look. A man fighting an argument inside his own skull. An argument that goes, if he saw the truth and still could not save us, what chance did we ever have? That night, Lights Out finds Mueller lying awake again, staring at the roof beams. Around him, the low breathing and occasional cough of men who, 3 years ago, marched behind flags in perfect, drilled lines. He thinks of 3 Rommels. The romantic hero from the newsreels, all dust and daring. The clipped, austere face on the American newspaper, reduced to a caption about poison. And this new one, half hero, half warning. A man who saw the math of the war before most and still could not quite break from the machine that would grind him down. In the darkness, a quiet, almost shameful realization forms. If even a field marshal could be both brilliant and trapped, then what excuse do ordinary men have for not thinking, not asking, not seeing? In Camp Swift, the Americans are not trying to erase the Desert Fox. They're doing something sharper. They're turning him from a legend you can hide behind into a mirror you might accidentally see yourself in.
Winter comes late to Texas, but it comes. The dust is colder now when the wind picks it up. The nights bite a little harder through the thin blankets. Somewhere far away, German boys are freezing in forests with names like Hurtgen and Ardennes. In Camp Swift, the men look up at a clean, wide American sky and wonder who is still alive on the other side of the ocean. The war moves forward on the bulletin board. Front lines creep. City names change color. But inside some of the POWs, something else is moving backward, away from slogans, toward questions. One afternoon, Mueller is called again to the office hut. He expects another translation session, another stack of newspapers. Instead, the lieutenant from before is standing by the wall map with his hands in his pockets, expression unusually careful. "Mueller," he says, "come here a second." The map is different this time. No red and blue pins, no grease pencil arrows, just outlines. Europe in bare geography. Rivers, coasts, city dots. On a small card table beneath it lies a tray of colored flags and pins. "Humor me," the lieutenant says. "Spiel mit mir, ja? Let's play a little game." He gestures to the map. "Show me," he says, "Germany after the war." The question hits harder than any piece of propaganda film. "Nach dem Krieg?" Mueller repeats. "After the war?" "Yes," the American says quietly. "Pretend peace has come. Show me what you think Germany will look like." For a moment, Mueller genuinely does not understand. For years, "after the war" has meant "after victory." The phrase has lived in sentences like, "After the war, I'll go back to university," or "After we win, we'll get the Sudetenland properly organized." Now, with so much map shaded against them, "after the war" has become something else. Not victory, not even necessarily survival, just a condition. He reaches for a pen, hesitates. "I don't know," he says. It comes out in German, stripped bare. "Ich weiß es nicht." The lieutenant shrugs. Nobody does, that's the point. But what do you think? Not what Goebbels thought in 42, what you think now. The room is quiet. Beyond the window, men are singing something ragged and half-hearted in the yard. Slowly, Mueller starts to place pins. One on Berlin, one on Hamburg, one on Leipzig, where his parents still live, unless the last raid took them. "I think," he clears his throat, "I think this will still be Germany." His finger hovers over the old 1937 borders, then pulls back an inch. "Maybe a little kleiner, smaller." "A little smaller," the lieutenant echoes, neutrally. "East?" Mueller nods once. He has seen the Red Army arrows on earlier maps. He knows what revenge will mean in places where German boots marched hard. He puts a different colored flag on the Ruhr. "This," he searches for words, "I would not let us keep all this steel together in one hand again."
The lieutenant's eyes flick to him, measuring. And if we don't? Then you must decide, Mueller says slowly, surprising himself with the bluntness, whether you want, how do you say, a crippled neighbor or a civilized one. It is more honest than anything he has said to an American so far. The lieutenant looks at the pins, then at Mueller. So, he says, almost conversationally, you don't imagine a stab in the back story this time. The old Dolchstoßlegende, the myth that Germany was unbeaten in 1918, only betrayed at home. Mueller thinks of the films, the clippings, the Rommel pamphlet, the talk of Weimar and choices. He thinks of the distance between what he used to believe about the war and what the numbers on the bulletin board now insist upon. No, he says quietly, this time we will know we lost. The sentence feels like stepping off a cliff and finding solid ground instead of air. The lieutenant nods, almost respectfully. Then maybe, he says, that's where you start. He takes a clean sheet of paper, writes at the top in block letters, Nach dem Krieg, after the war. If you go back, he says, putting the paper in front of Mueller with a pencil, and somebody asks you, where were you when everything ended? What did you see? What will you tell them? Mueller stares at the page. His mind jumps, unbidden, to Rommel again, to the idea of an officer whose last act was to vanish quietly in a forest, leaving others to invent the story afterward. Write it for yourself, the American says, not unkindly. For a long moment, nothing moves. Then the pencil touches paper. I was in Texas, in a camp in the dust. We saw your films. We read your newspapers. We talked in huts about a Germany we had only half known. He does not know that years from now, fragments of this page will become part of another war's archive, another historian's footnote. For now, it is simply an answer to a question that will not stop forming in his own head. When I go home, if I go home, what kind of German will I be? Outside, the bulletin board map keeps changing. Somewhere back in the story's other thread, a staff car once carried a field marshal to his last silent appointment under tall pines. In Camp Swift, the men who once marched for him in the desert, the myth of the desert fox has finished its final transformation. He is no longer a promise of victory. He is a warning about what happens when clever men see the truth too late. The clock in the guest room is too loud. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound is a nail driven further into a day that has already been decided for him. Outside, the October night in Herrlingen is very still. No artillery, no engines, no desert wind. Just the occasional rustle of trees around the house, the creak of old timbers, as if the building itself is holding its breath. Rommel sits on the edge of the narrow bed, still in his tunic. The field marshal's baton is not here. The medals are in a drawer. Stripped of ceremony, the uniform looks almost ordinary, cloth and buttons, and a man trying to breathe. On the chair beside him lies the letter from Bergdorf, the choice it offers, written in euphemisms. He doesn't need to reread it. The words are carved into his skull already. Traitors, conspiracy, honor, family. He looks at his hands. They tremble very slightly, the way they did once in North Africa after 3 days without proper sleep, when the reports of fuel and ammunition began to contradict the orders from above. Then he could still tell himself there was a way through, a flank to turn, a supply dump to seize, a bluff to play. Now the map is very small. It is a single road through the woods, one staff car, 2 directions, to Berlin and a show trial, or to a doctor with a thin glass vial. The clock on the dresser says 3:43 a.m. He does not know the exact moment history will choose to remember. The time on the poison certificate, the time of the report that will go back to Hitler, the invented detail some later writer will use to pin this night to a page, if they ever write it at all. He stands, crosses to the window. The house is dark. Everyone else is asleep. Lucia, Manfred, the servants, even the officers assigned to watch him are resting in shifts, confident in the net that is closed around their prize. For a strange floating instant, he is back in the desert, standing on a ridge at dawn, binoculars raised, watching Allied columns move like slow steel rivers across the sand, counting trucks, guns, tanks, until the numbers snapped something deep inside him. We cannot win this. He had known it then, the math was merciless. But knowledge did not come with a guidebook. It did not tell him exactly when to stop obeying or how to turn a lifetime of discipline into open rebellion. He had done what he could within the lines he could imagine, argued for retreat, refused senseless orders, spoke dark truths to a Führer who no longer lived in the same world as his generals. And now the bill for those half-steps, those not quite broken ranks, has arrived at his own front door. The clock clicks to 3:47. Later, men in a camp in Texas will point to that time on a thumbnail, on a video, on a page, and call it the Desert Fox's darkest hour. For him, it is something quieter and more terrible. The hour when the story he has been telling himself about loyalty and duty and Germany finally runs out of road. He thinks not of Hitler, but of the men, the ones he left in Africa, the ones still somewhere in Italy, Russia, France, the prisoners in far-off countries being shown films and maps and questions about what comes after. What kind of Germany will you be when this is over? He will not see that Germany. He understands that now with a clarity almost like a relief. Whatever comes next, in ruins or in reconstruction, it will not be his to command. What he can choose in this narrow slice of time is the manner of his exit. To go to Berlin would be to lend his face, his name, his legend to one last obscene performance, a trial, confessions torn from him, a rope, a newspaper lie about treason, the Desert Fox paraded as a rabid dog. To take the vial is to give his enemies what they want, his silence, but deny them the spectacle. To protect, perhaps, the family sleeping under this roof from the full fury that falls on traitors' kin. Obedience on one side of the board, responsibility on the other. He thinks of the young officers who looked at him and saw certainty, of the millions who heard his name on the radio and believed, for a little longer, that someone had the situation in hand. He had been their myth, their excuse not to look too closely at the widening disaster. Now his last act is to refuse them a final, comfortable story. There will be no public retraction, no staged confession, only a space in the record, an official lie so thin that any thinking man will feel, instinctively, the shape of the truth behind it. In that space, others will ask the questions he did not ask soon enough. He closes his eyes. Somewhere far away, a pencil moves across a page in a Texas hut. I was in a camp in the dust. We saw your films. We talked about a Germany we had only half known. Somewhere further on, boys not yet born will read both stories, the staff car in the forest and the map with no arrows, and decide what kind of Germans, or Americans, or anyone they want to be when their own midnight choices come. Rommel opens his eyes. The clock says 3:47 a.m. It is time to walk downstairs. If you'd like, I can now